Throughout gaming's history, there have been some incredible games. On December 13th, 2002, Nintendo created the critically acclaimed The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. However, at that time, many fans had an issue with its cartoony art style. It's now 2025. How does the game stack up? Were the critics right, and is this really a masterpiece? Or did the cel-shaded art style hold it back? So let's dive in to The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. After the opening cutscene, you are placed right into Outset Island. The bright colors and the friendly music really make you feel right at home. Our first task is to train with the old man with our sword. He tells you to keep thrusting. Pause. We then visit Grandma, who gives us a birthday present that Link surely loves. Now that we're dressed as the hero, we can collect a very special gift from our sister. Make sure you don't get caught by Zill the booger boy on the way there. You disgust me. So here you are, enjoying your birthday, your sister gives you her prized telescope, pirates show up, and Big Bird comes along and suddenly drops a girl into the forest. So it's up to Link to save the day. So now we go up the mountain, fight a couple bokoblins, and then get our fit insulted by Tetra. On the way back to the village, this is where the real story picks up. Your sister's kidnapped, and suddenly your quest has begun, on an epic adventure to save your sister. Or at least it would have if you didn't get completely rejected by Tetra, but luckily the Chad Quill steps in, he vouches for you, and you're allowed to go. However, before you leave the island, there's still one more thing you have to do. You have to get your family shield and tell your grandma goodbye. When you go up to the mantle, you realize the shield is already gone. You drop down to the ground level, and the grandma theme starts to play. She's gripping the shield tightly because she knows you need it and that you need to leave. But at the same time, she just lost both of her children. It's genuinely a sad part of the game, especially if you have an older family member who has experienced this kind of loss. That feeling is something that can be relatable to the player. Overall, the introduction to Wind Waker may not be the flashiest or most action-heavy scene, but it's kind of simple and there's a charm to that. You have a motivation, you want to save your sister, you want to come back home and make your grandma feel better. I think this game perfectly encapsulates that sense of adventure. Link is nothing special, he's just somebody who's forced to act. The pirates take you to the Forsaken Fortress, where your sister's being held captive. Unfortunately, it's pretty much impossible to get inside the fortress, but it leads to a moment that really portrays the goofiness of this version of Link. I have no idea what Nintendo dev decided to put Link in a barrel and play the same couple of grunts on loop, but it adds so much to the whimsical and silly nature that this game is striving for. Once inside, everything worked exactly as planned, and you finally get to save your sister. Or at least, maybe it would have if you didn't lose your sword. The Forsaken Fortress essentially acts as the game's first dungeon. While I personally don't mind the occasional espionage mission, I always felt like it was a little odd to have this mix up so early in the game. It's good to shake up the standard combat of a game every once in a while, but at this point you haven't really experienced the combat to shake up. I've always felt that the Forsaken Fortress and losing your sword would have done much better as a mid to late game area. It would be more akin to Eventide Island in Breath of the Wild, where you are stripped of the tools you become so accustomed to, and now you have to start back at square one. Essentially, your goal is to sneak all the way back up to the top and reclaim your sword. However, in order to accomplish this goal, you have to disable all of the spotlights and solely fight some of the smaller enemies with random weapons that you pick up off of the ground. This new approach in combat is honestly pretty enjoyable, and it's fairly creative, especially for as early as this game came out. You can see how the combat structure is an early framework for the future Switch titles. The sneaking, on the other hand, is a bit more tedious, and can get annoying real fast when a rat shows up. They can knock you directly out of your hiding spot. If you want to sneak successfully, you need to pull a solid snake and get your box out, or in this case a barrel, and slowly sneak your way up to the top of the fortress. Hey, nothing to see here, guys. Towards the end of the dungeon, you have to sidle across two thin paths. Which, I have to admit, as a dumb kid, I legitimately thought sidling was not a real thing, and I thought they legitimately had a typo for the word slide. Reading is hard. On the bright side, once you're done sidling, not sliding, you finally get your sword back and save your sister. Or at least you do until you get eaten by the bird. The bird takes you up to meet Ganondorf, he chucks you out into the sea, and that's pretty much the end of the Forsaken Fortress. It's a fun mini dungeon, and it's just a shame it wasn't worked a bit later into the story. You wake up to the cheerful music of Windfall Island, and then you meet your new friend, a talking boat. Yeah, I think I'd be pretty shocked too. The King of Red Lions in this game is your companion character. He'll give you lots of advice. The only issue is he's having some performance problems. So you offer to help him find a sail. However, he says this is no time to play, so you know what that means. After an unwavering quest to find the sail, we buy it. I love Windfall Island. The music is quaint, there's a colorful cast of characters, and it's almost like it's a main hub for the rest of your playthrough. It has the most side quests out of any island. There's an auction house where you can start bidding wars and win pieces of hearts and other rare items. There's even a quest to get your own private island oasis. And all you have to do is play some hide and seek with some snot-nosed kids. Caught you! Wait, where you go? Wait.
The arms of the angel.
Oh, she's fine. There's a Picto Box quest, a giant trade quest, and even a fun little cannonball game. Kaboom! There's also this interesting dynamic between a rich man and a poor man on the island. Essentially, both of their daughters were kidnapped, and as a result of getting their daughters back, they actually swap fortunes. Windfall Island is just such a fun island to explore. Oh, I forgot, you meet the main antagonist here too. He's evil, trust me. However, the most important thing is that you get your sail, and once you have it, you can make your way to Dragon Roost Island. While the Zelda franchise is known for its amazing music, the Dragon Roost Island theme sits near the top. It's one of the best tracks in the entire franchise, and personally, I think it's my favorite song from this game. It invokes a feeling of freedom and adventure, a perfect melody to represent the Rito. I could talk about Zelda music all day, but I'm not the only one. It looks like the King of Red Lions is just as enthusiastic as me, because the first thing he gives us on the island is the Wind Waker. Oh, he said the thing! He said the title! This is the magical instrument of choice for this iteration of Link. After receiving the magic baton, we can learn Wind's Requiem. This is an imperative song for the rest of the game. It allows you to change the direction of the wind, which is useful for both sailing and exploring various parts of the map. As you bomb your way up the mountain, you eventually encounter your good friend Quill. He tells you that he thinks the chieftain can help find your sister, but of course, they're having problems of their own. The Rito normally rely on a dragon scale from the Great Valu in order to gain their wings. Seems pretty inefficient if you ask me. In any case, something's causing the Great Valu to be extremely violent. Because of this, the chieftain's son is depressed and convinced he has no future. Aww. The chieftain basically says he's at a loss, and maybe you can talk to his son, man to man. If that doesn't work, maybe talk to Valu's attendant or something. So we finally talk to Prince Komali, and he calls us nosy. He's one to talk. So instead we meet with Medley, Valu's attendant, and she's going to Dragon Roost Cavern to fix the issue. But don't tell nobody. So obviously you're not gonna let her go alone. You fix their spring, you bomb some of their statues, and you get into the cavern. Dragon Roost Cavern is the first official dungeon of the game. This dungeon's first half mostly consists of simple puzzles that require the use of flammable sticks to either light torches, burn wood walls, or even to use water pots to create hard land to stand on the lava. One of the standout rooms to me is when you have to hunt down all the bokoblins in a room full of pots. Only the catch is, there are several bokoblins actually hiding in the pots. Another thing that I really like is you actually exit the dungeon. You go outside and physically see yourself climbing higher and higher. You eventually find Medley locked up and you have to save her by fighting some enemies. However, this fight's actually pretty cool because some birds actually drop larger mobs to fight you. Specifically, they're the same enemy type you had to run away from in Forsaken Fortress. When you save her, you were given the training tool for Rito fledglings, the grappling hook. Even though it's limited in use, it's still one of my favorite items in the Wind Waker. There's something very cool about swinging a whip, even if it is only at designated areas. It lets you feel like you're Indiana Jones. The cavern concludes with a boss fight against Goma. While it's a fairly easy fight, I actually applaud its complexity, especially for a starter dungeon boss. It requires you to use your grappling hook on Valu's tail 3 times in order to have the ceiling cave in on Goma and crack her hard shell. So when the Rito ask who was hurting Valu and causing all the problems in their village, you keep my name out your mouth. After fully cracking her shell, the second phase starts. This is where you can grapple her eyeball and bring her close enough for you to slash her. This is not difficult at all, and I don't think it's supposed to be. This is the first real dungeon where combat is important. I think it does an excellent job of easing you into the combat and letting you explore with a new mobility item. As soon as you finish the fight, you're teleported back to the beginning of the island. Prince Komali is so grateful and he gives you his spirit orb. From this point on, you're able to change the wind, head south, and go to the Forest Haven. Upon your arrival to the Forest Haven, the King of Red Lions warns that the Great Deku Tree might have already succumbed to Ganon's dark forces. And we start our journey into the Haven, and to get there we use our trusty new grappling hook. Once inside, you realize the King of Red Lions' fears came true, and the Deku Tree is being attacked by an army of Chuchellis. You literally need to use your head to knock them down and take out the army. The Great Deku Tree recognizes that you are here to save your sister and potentially the world, so he will gladly give you the Spirit Orb, right after the Korok Christmas. But the ceremony is interrupted because the Koroks can't find Makar. He's fallen deep into the Forbidden Woods. So as in all cases, we are voluntold to help. Our new tree friend grows a giant pimple that will act as our new item, the Deku Leaf. However, in order to get to the Deku Leaf, you need to take these flowers that shoot you up in the air. This part has always been mildly annoying, because if you're not facing directly at the next flower, you may just fall all the way back down to the bottom and have to hop all your way back up. I will say, once you get the Deku Leaf, shooting out of these flowers is significantly more enjoyable. Being able to glide really increases that margin of error. This is another very fun item. It's clear that the Wind Waker dev team really wanted you to have lots of ways to maneuver throughout the world. Being able to glide really opens up a lot of options for mobility, one of which is a short puzzle that actually takes you into the next dungeon. When using the Deku Leaf outside, you are susceptible to the wind direction. So in order to make it across each of these platforms, you actually need to change the wind direction. It's a simple yet clever mechanic to allow Link to reach greater distances. This ultimately is what allows the player to reach the Forbidden Woods. The Forbidden Woods acts as a second dungeon. In terms of complexity, it ups the scales a bit. However, for the most part, you'll be solving the puzzles by throwing acorns at vines, jumping off of the flowers, and using Deku Leaves to fight enemies and provide more movement. What I really like about this dungeon is that they give you a new tool, being the Deku Leaf, and it's incorporated into the first half of the dungeon, so all of these new puzzles feel really fresh. Eventually, you make it to the first mini-boss of the game, Mothula. It's a larger version of the smaller moths that you fought at the beginning of the dungeon. It shoots little spiky balls on you that you have to spin attack to get off. It's somewhat satisfying considering that the quick spin attack requires you to do a special input to actually pull off. Mothula is not difficult by any means, but it allows you to approach the fight however you'd like. For me, that basically meant swinging away at it with my sword. Once you defeat Mothula, you are gifted the boomerang. The boomerang is actually a very useful tool. It allows you to knock down the vines from the ceiling or even the doors that we needed the nuts to break before. Eventually, you use your boomerang to knock down a giant plant to break through the floor below. You chop down a flower and kind of ride it like a raft, steering it with your Deku Leaf. Who needs a sail? Boomerang puzzles mostly consist of you having to hit multiple targets at once. After progressing, you finally make it to the boss room key, and they decide to do something extremely unique. They airdrop more moblins on you. Again. Okay, so obviously this is not as cool as the first time, but it's kind of nice to see that you're actually gaining strength, because now with the boomerang you can stun them and very easily take them out, suppressing their defenses. So now that you have the boss key and the boomerang, you make your way all the way back up to the top to fight the boss. Cel-shaded. It's significantly more difficult than the first boss. It requires the player to both avoid attacks from tentacles and also use the boomerangs on the ceiling vines. Once you knock off all the vines from the ceiling, the flower falls and it opens up to reveal that Cel-shaded is no more than a little bitty plant controlling the rest. You go up and slash the little guy and rinse and repeat until it's dead. I'm not the biggest fan of boomerang style bosses. It feels like a lot of times where you launch your boomerang, it just bounces off random edges. Also, this boss isn't exactly anything new to the Zelda franchise. It's always reminded me of Baronade from Ocarina of Time. Both heavily rely on the use of the boomerang to knock down some kind of vine tentacle thing. Overall, the dungeon itself is super fun. It allows the player to utilize several mobility tools, such as the Deku Leaf and Grappling Hook, to create new ways to overcome obstacles. The mini-boss is incredibly fun, although a bit easy. It's a good dungeon. I just wish the boss was a little bit more unique. Once you finish the dungeon, you are again teleported outside, except this time you get to celebrate the Korok celebration. No, not that one. Honestly, I love this part so much. It really hits that whimsical and jovial nature. Link's facial expressions while the Koroks are all singing is a moment that I couldn't help but smile. At the end of the ceremony, it's revealed that the Great Deku Tree is actually wanting to spread his seed throughout the world. Huh. Anyway, that's pretty much it for the Forbidden Woods. And finally, we can go collect our final Spirit Orb. Oh, and we saved Makar. To get the third Spirit Orb, we have to go to the Greatfish Island. But unfortunately, the island is completely destroyed, and we have no idea where to go, until our boy Quill shows up to help us out. He says Jaboon the Hutt is now located on Outset Island, but we can't do anything until we go talk to the pirates at Windfall Island. So to get the third Spirit Orb, we must go to Windfall Island. We get to Windfall Island and discover the pirates have hijacked the bomb shop. You sneak into the bomb shop to discover that they are hurrying to get to Outset Island so that they can get the Spirit Orb before you. But Tetra sees you and she knows what's up. Unfortunately, the pirates have stolen all the bombs, so what do we need to do? Steal from the pirates. However, Nico is on guard duty, and he insists we play some pirate games in order to get the bombs. But instead, I would rather just lock him up forever. Then again, I can't progress if I don't play their game. So I do, and I steal their bombs. Now that we have the bombs, we can go and get the third Spirit Orb. The third Spirit Orb is located on Outset Island. As you can see, this orb primarily requires a lot of travel. It probably takes more time sailing than it does to get the actual Spirit Orb. It's not entirely unfun to sail, but I will say it adds some fluff to the playtime. Well, anyways, we arrive at Outset Island with our bombs, and it's time to cause chaos. After some mild destruction, we bomb the wall and take Jaboon's Spirit Orb. Unfortunately, due to time constraints and development, they actually had to cut this dungeon. And that's unfortunate, but I think I kinda see what the developers were going for with this third Spirit Orb. They tried their best to make the world itself a dungeon. However, it's more or less a large fetch quest. Even when breaking the wall down, there's a whirlpool that's supposed to seem threatening, but it's more of just a waiting game until you get close enough to bomb the wall. That being said, one thing Wind Waker does extremely well is remind you that people live in this world. On Outset, if you ever visit your grandma at night, she is fast asleep, but she's presumably having nightmares, begging for Link and Ariel to not leave her alone. And again, with that grandma theme playing, it actually leads to a pretty somber moment. It's moments like these that really show Link's motivation, and why he keeps pushing forward. We can now leave Outset Island with all three Spirit Orbs in hand. The King of Red Lions requests us to put them on specific locations to open up the Test of Courage. Remember, you're technically still trying to save your sister, but I guess there's talks of you potentially saving the whole world, even though you aren't the hero of lineage. Once you place all three Spirit Orbs, the Tower of Gods is revealed. The Tower of Gods' main gimmick in the first half is having you deal with the water levels constantly changing. The puzzles are decently fun, but they do require some waiting since you don't directly control the water levels. And waiting. And waiting, and waiting. And when you're done waiting, sometimes you get to put little statues down that make a funny noise. Another unique aspect of this dungeon is you actually get to do part of it on the King of Red Lions. You don't really get to do anything too crazy, but it's pretty fun to be able to shoot cannons. The next part of the dungeon requires you to command the statues using a new song, the Command Melody. It's an okay mechanic. It essentially lets you take control of the statues and move around as them. In later dungeons, there's a little bit more you can do with it, but for now, that's pretty much it. After solving a couple puzzles, you make it to the mini-boss of this dungeon, a Dark Nut. This is probably the toughest enemy that you have fought so far. Most of your tools don't work on him, and your best method of beating him is to use the counter mechanic. And this leads to one of the better items in a Zelda game, being none other than the bow and arrow. The bow and arrow in Wind Waker is not too dissimilar from other Zelda games. It also allows you to hit the eye switches like in previous titles. I like to think of this as the turning point for the game. There's always a part in the Zelda games where both the puzzles and the difficulty steps it up. I'd like to think this is the start of it for Wind Waker. You start seeing a lot more late game enemies, like Wizrobes. And the puzzles are a little bit more complex, where the answers may not be right in front of you, sometimes requiring you to go to multiple rooms for a single puzzle. While the enemies you encounter are technically more difficult, the game is extremely generous with dropping spirit orbs, which almost always give you enough hearts or items to max yourself back out. That being said, one thing I really enjoy about the Tower of Gods is it's not only using the bow and arrow as the new item. It's a mix of the new melody, the bow and arrow, the bombs, the grappling hook, and even gliding with your Deku Leaf. It really wants you to use your whole arsenal. It makes you feel like you're adding to Link's kit rather than just using an item in a dungeon. One of my favorite puzzles in this dungeon is when you have to balance different statues like a scale in order to get the statue of the god across the gap. Towards the end of the dungeon, you again get to step outside, and it's really cool because it shows the scale of the tower. You have ascended this ginormous structure. It's just a short walk up to the boss, and it's time to be tested. You fight the great Ganon. I love this boss fight. This fight has always been incredibly fun. It's got a lot of things that I like. The atmosphere of it being a test to see if you're the ultimate hero or not. It's a boss that requires you to use multiple items such as the bombs and the arrows. It's got a good soundtrack, and then of course he shoots freaking lasers out of his mouth. Now I know I complained earlier about how a Wind Waker boss was similar to an Ocarina of Time boss, and some could argue that Ganon is pretty similar to Bongo Bongo, but I'm not one of those people, and Ganon slaps. I've always liked fighting giant robots, and there's something that feels very fun about running from explosions. You essentially need to shoot his hands until they're disabled. He'll open his eyes, you shoot those, you dodge the lasers, throw a bomb in his mouth, rinse and repeat. And if you run out of arrows or bombs, don't worry, he'll give you a snot rocket. Ganon is definitely my favorite fight in the Wind Waker so far. And immediately after you beat Ganon, it follows it up with another cool part of the game. They send you to the top of the tower to ring the bell. Which of course is again done by a very simple method, by having the player use the grappling hook to actually ring the bell. It's such a simple design choice that feels amazing as a player. It again makes you use the tools that you've been building up, not just for enemies, but for the world traversal as well. Ringing the bell opens up a pathway to access below the sea, and this leads to one of my favorite aesthetics in the game, Hyrule Castle. Hyrule Castle is completely void of color. You roam through it and everything is completely frozen in time, almost as if something is sealed away. And sure enough, something is sealed away, the Master Sword. When you get the Master Sword and pull it, you break the seal, releasing the flow of time and all of Ganon's evil creatures. You may already know, but Wind Waker is a timeline in the Zelda universe in which Ganondorf was sealed away by the Link from Ocarina of Time. Eons later, Ganondorf is resurrected and Hyrule has to be sealed and flooded in order to keep him at bay. And this is the Hyrule Castle where that took place. I love that this ties into not only the game, but into the greater Zelda universe. While it's brief, it's definitely one of my favorite moments from the Wind Waker. Since the seal was broken when you pull the Master Sword, all the enemies are now released and you have to take them out before you can return to the surface. I love how not even 30 minutes ago, they just used the Dark Nut as a mini-boss, and suddenly they throw like 8 of them at you. The best part about the Dark Nut in Wind Waker is that they actually changed their combat style based on how much armor you knock off. Eventually, they just start throwing hands against you. After clearing out all the enemies, it really is the time to finally save our sister and fight Ganondorf. But this time, we're taking the battle to him and we're charging the Forsaken Fortress. You arrive at the Forsaken Fortress and use bombs to force your way in. Ganon basically left you a little surprise at the front door. A mini-boss known as Phantom Ganon. He challenges you to the Wimbledon exhibition match.
Wow, how well did he do that?
This fight is a callback to the Phantom Ganon from Ocarina of Time. But I love how the music in this one is intertwined with the slashing of the ball. Other than that, there's nothing too special about the fight, but after beating him, you are rewarded with the hammer. This allows you to smash buttons and get to the top of the fortress. Unfortunately, that's pretty much all they added for the second trip to the Forsaken Fortress. There's a couple extra enemies, but it definitely feels like filler. This again is why I think combining the 2 Forsaken Fortress sections into one would have been beneficial. If you lost your sword and had to sneak back to the top, it would actually feel kind of rewarding. The Phantom Ganon fight could even be right after you get your sword back. This would also allow for a boss right before saving your sister instead of just a hammer. Even though the second visit is a bit mid, the next section kind of makes up for it. You actually rescue your sister for real, and it leads to a touching reunion. Finally, after a perilous journey, you made it, and you can save all of the prisoners. Ariel's theme hits, and it makes you feel like you've truly accomplished something. Tetra shows up to help save your sister, but then she reminds you there's still work to do, so you promise to finish the fight. However, just as they leave, the door suddenly shuts behind them, and water starts to suddenly fill up the room, and you're greeted by none other than the Helmaroc King. The first phase of this boss fight starts as a race to the top. You need to quickly escape before the water fills the room and makes you drown. There's a sense of urgency, and I love the race against the clock. On your way to the top, you need to dodge attacks from both the king and random mobs. The king will also break the bridges leading upwards if you aren't quick enough. Luckily, even if you aren't quick enough, there are small posts that you can grapple on to get across the gaps. It's a thrilling escape sequence, and it's a great setup to the boss fight. When you reach the top, it's time for the fated duel. You versus the bird who stole your sister. The game has been leading up to this exact moment. You need to dodge attacks from the Helmaroc and bash his head in with a hammer to break his mask. Occasionally, he will scrape his claws across the floors and maybe even run into a wall. The fight itself isn't too difficult, but it feels great to finally triumph against the enemy you have been prepping against since the beginning of the game. I especially love how when you finally win, there is a climactic death for the Helmaroc King. He flies way up into the sky with spotlights on him and poofs away. Link is victorious and can finally take on Ganondorf. However, it turns out Ganondorf duped everyone, and the Master Sword is only a shell of what it used to be. It lost the power to repel evil. In fact, Ganondorf is so cocky he even mocks Link, and basically says he's toast. But luckily, Tetra swoops in to save the day. Ganondorf has the upper hand when suddenly his Triforce starts reacting to Tetra. And surprise, surprise, it turns out Tetra is actually Zelda. It looks like all hope is lost, but then the Chad Quill returns. The true hero of our story arrives to save the day, and even Valu shows up to help. In fact, he basically burns Ganondorf alive. So it's not actually over, but they do take us back to Hyrule. And it turns out the King of Red Lions is actually the King of Hyrule. He explains that Tetra has the Triforce of Wisdom, and that it's been passed down through her family for generations. She is the reincarnation of Zelda. The reason all of this is important is because Ganondorf has reawakened. In order for you to defeat him, you need the Master Sword at full power in the Triforce of Courage. The game has now transitioned into saving your family to saving the world. The next part of the game requires you to track down 2 sages to power up your Master Sword. This is where the game really opens up. There are pretty much no barriers in the world, so progression can be different for every player. Wind Waker offers a huge world to explore. It has a 7x7 map that has at least one event on each tile. The Fishman is located at each one of these squares to help fill in the map and give you information on what's inside the tile. There's treasure hunts that require you to compare your map with the treasure charts in order to find its location. X marks the spot after all. You can find fairies that give you significant upgrades like bigger bomb bags or larger wallets. You can even come across a giant kraken if you're not careful. The scope and scale of this world is actually very impressive for a game that came out in 2002. This open world is what really gave Wind Waker its charm. You are out on an adventure across the vast ocean. There are so many little surprises that make you want to keep exploring. The exploration and freedom is by far the best part of Wind Waker. I know that I'll never forget when I came across Cyclos for my first time. He's a frog genie who rides a massive cyclone. As a kid, I remember treating it as something to avoid. But eventually, you'll see a frog hiding in the strong winds. Once you notice him, you start to think there has to be some way to interact with him. And what better way to interact than with violence and arrows? After shooting Cyclos, he becomes a very important character. He offers to teleport you anywhere throughout the map just by playing his tune. This is essentially a fast travel method to help you explore the world easier. And luckily for us, this is exactly what we need to progress. Cyclos allows you to teleport to the Queen of the Great Fairies, a place inaccessible through normal means. She's like a puppet master and kind of odd. You hear her theme playing in the background and you hear random cricketing noises. It kind of gives me the creeps. Not much is really known about her, but it does seem like she's playing with a great fairy. She's a rather mysterious character. Well, at least she's on our side because she does give us the fire and ice arrows. This allows us to go to the Fire and Ice Islands respectively. Both of these islands have similar characteristics. They both contain an item required to get into the temples, and both contain a race against the clock. To get to the Fire Island, you need to freeze it with an ice arrow, and then it's a race to the top of the volcano. Once inside, you defeat a couple of bugs and you unlock the power bracelets. They make you very strong. The ice island is similar, except you have to slide all the way through. I hate ice puzzles. I fell several times, only having to redo all of the ice path again. I do not like sliding. But at least when you beat it, you get the iron boots, so you're allowed to walk through strong winds. Behind the strong wind of the ice cavern, there's even a secret tunnel. It leads to a nice orange rupee. Both of these islands are more like mini games with necessary items to progress. One of them is a fun distraction, and they can be completed in any order. However, once we've obtained these upgrades, it's time to head to the Earth Temple. To get inside the Earth Temple, we must go to Headstone Island and lift up the giant head. Pause. Then we learn a new song from the Zora Sage, which if you didn't know, the Rito are actually evolutions of the Zora. We take this new song back to Valu's attendant, Medley. Which, fun fact, I talked my parents into naming their cat Medley because she too has a big orange nose. I like how they decide to use existing characters in this world and give them a greater importance. Medley is a character you just helped out one time, and suddenly she's a sage who is essential to helping repair the Master Sword and save the world. The Medley that we play for Medley awakens her inner sage, and Medley realizes her importance to the world. It leads to a touching moment where Medley accepts her fate as a sage and realizes the job she must fulfill. However, she wants to leave in secret. She doesn't want Komali to see her as a sage, but instead as a simple friend. With Medley, we can proceed back to the temple and are now able to get inside. But not before a jam session. The Earth Temple requires you to use the command melody to control Medley. This allows you to reach new heights and even press buttons that are inaccessible to Link. Taking control of Medley is significantly more fun than when you take control of the statues at the Tower of God. There's something that's simply just fun about flying as Medley. The other main gimmick of this dungeon is reflecting light. You can do so by using Medley's harp. You can reflect the light to unlock new treasures or defeat shadow enemies. Of course, this is also the first introduction of the Re-Dead in this game. Although this is one aspect of the game where I think the cartoony and whimsical nature actually hurts the game. I just really don't find them intimidating at all, especially if you compare them to their other appearances. Eventually, you'll make it to the mini-boss, which in this game is the intimidating Staphos. I like this fight because you get to basically approach it however you want, with the main goal being to knock off its head and then take it out. So after you beat the Staphos, you get, you fight the army of the dead. That's right, in this fight it's not one, but 3 Staphos. It's not too difficult, but I love the atmosphere and how more come out of the coffins. Once you defeat all 3, a stairway is revealed and you are gifted with the mirror shield. This is a very useful item because we can now reflect the light without relying on Medley. Not that it's inherently a bad thing, but it does get a little bit annoying having to do the command melody over and over again. One of my favorite aspects of this dungeon is once you get the mirror shield. You can chain the reflections bouncing off Medley's harp and then your own shield. It feels very satisfying when you line it up just right. As you progress, Medley, I'm a little busy at the moment, so remember how I said it gets a little tedious using the command melody? Well, guess what? You have to do that a lot. However, after you finish a mirror shield puzzle, you eventually make it to a boss key. This is where you fight a Dark Nut, and it's really freaking annoying because those skeletons float around, and if they hit you, they make it so you can't use any of your weapons. So it's a somewhat tedious fight, but you finally get the key and you can go to the boss. Jalhalla. Jalhalla is essentially one big Poe that's comprised of many little Poes. The fight itself is relatively simple. You use the mirror shield to shine light on the big fatty until he takes a physical form. Once he takes that form, you can throw him into the spike wall. However, if you're like me, you'll notice you need to specifically throw them into the tall wall. Otherwise, you'll be throwing him an infinite amount of times. Once you throw him into the large spiked wall, he'll break into many smaller Poes. You need to go up and slash as many of them as you can until he reforms again. Rinse and repeat this process until they're all dead. Or dead-er? This fight's definitely fun, albeit a bit simple. I love how goofy all the little Poes are as they scramble to avoid you. It's not a difficult fight by any means, but it definitely has kind of a fun mechanic. Once you defeat Jalhalla, you have a short concert with Medley and regain some of the Master Sword's power. All that's left now is to reclaim the other half, and to do that, we need to head to the Wind Temple. Once we arrive at the Wind Temple, we find out there's a relic shooting a strong gust of wind, keeping out unwelcome guests. So, we move the relic out of the way. Very similar to the Earth Temple, we meet the original sage, who was actually a Kokiri child. Which again, it's heavily implied that the Koroks are actually the Kokiri, who have changed form from the power of the Deku Tree in order to keep them safe. We are told we need to find somebody who plays the violin, just like Fado. Luckily for us, it's our boy Makar. So we find his secret base in the waterfall at Forest Haven, and awaken his inner sage. Then we take him with us to the Wind Temple. Of course, after a quick jam session, the temple's open. The Wind Temple starts out incredibly similar to the Earth Temple. You need to use the command melody to fly with Makar. He can hit various switches that affect winds and platforms. He can spread the seed of the Deku Tree. And of course, he has a funny noise when he walks. The difference in this dungeon is they forcefully take Makar to the void. Oh well, truthfully he's in a prison and you have to navigate to get back to him. I like this first part of the dungeon a lot. It requires you to use the iron boots and the Deku Leaf to maneuver around not only horizontally but vertically as well. It again feels like one of those moments where you are using your tools that you've been accumulating throughout the game. Nothing better encapsulates this than with the mini boss, the Orange Wizrobe. It's basically like your normal Wizrobe, except he spawns in a bunch of enemies that you fought in your past. There's Darknuts, Kargaroks, Moblins, and the little orange guys that I can never remember the name of. All of these enemies have different weapons that are better suited for defeating them. It's fun to take on different combinations and trying to come up with the best solution to take them all out. Waves and waves of Ganon's forces will keep spawning until you take out the Orange Wizrobe. So you need to attack him and find his new teleporting spot and repeat until he's dead. And with this, you're rewarded with my favorite item from every Zelda game, and it is none other than the hook shot. The hook shot lets you hook onto specific platforms and quickly be pulled towards it. Using the hook shot, you're able to climb out of the hole you fell in and rescue Makar. However, one thing I have to say, and this isn't necessarily unique to just the hook shot, but the actual aiming has not aged very well. It's hard to line up your shot exactly where you want it to. It really makes you appreciate the newer titles, especially if they have gyro. That being said, we finally make it to Makar. However, in order to fully rescue him, the game actually introduces a new mechanic, which requires you to use both your iron boots and your hook shot at the same time. This allows you to be heavy enough to pull objects instead of being pulled. This again is something that I love and just feels super intuitive. If something's too heavy to pull down, of course, you make yourself heavier. It's these kind of puzzles that really make the player feel like they are progressing throughout the game. After saving Makar, we turn on the giant fan of the temple, and it allows us to get to different levels with the Deku Leaf. The rest of the puzzles aren't anything too crazy, but once you make it to the room with the boss key, you actually get to fight 3 Darknuts, one of which has a goatee. Once we have the key, we can go fight the boss. However, on the way there, there's actually a rather interesting room that's guarded by a Wizrobe and some Staphos. If you have the compass, it also shows you that there's a chest hidden in the room. However, to find the chest, they actually have bokoblins hidden on the wall statues. This again requires you to use your iron boots with the hook shot to pull them off the wall. For some reason, hiding bokoblins in random rooms is something I really like in the Wind Waker. There's something fun about its hide-and-seek nature. There's a couple of rooms with wind puzzles, and then you make it to the boss. Molgera. Molgera is the best boss fight so far. This has everything that you want within a fight. When you first enter the room, there's a giant sand pit, and you're curious of what could be inside. Then suddenly, a giant beast emerges and the theme starts playing. I used this theme earlier in the video because I think it's probably one of the best themes in the game. It's probably the second best right after the Roost Island theme for me. I love the intensity of this fight. How Molgera jumps out of the sand and dives back in trying to eat you alive. It's your goal to use the hook shot to grab its tongue and slash it. Every time you do this, it spawns little worms, and these are killed by using your hook shot on them, pulling them out of the sand so that they can be slashed. However, you need to be careful doing this because sometimes if you're too focused on the little guys, you might just get eaten by Molgera. It's a very fun fight with how much is going on, and it's one that I would love to do again. Once you defeat Molgera, you have a short duet with Makar, and then your Master Sword is finally restored to full power. Now that we have completed the Wind Temple, we are ready to take on Ganon. Sorta. Turns out we still need to assemble the Triforce of Courage, which has been spread out into 8 pieces throughout the land. This requires you to obtain the 8 Triforce charts, but unfortunately, even once you get them, they are not decipherable. You need help. Oh no. Please, anyone but... That's right. We need to use Tingle and his slave labor force to decipher these charts to find the remaining pieces of the Triforce. That's really not too bad. You just bring all the charts here and he charges you 398 per map. 398 per map! So in order to beat the game, you have to earn a lot of money. Many people find this part extremely tedious, but I have to say, I actually like this mechanic. When I'm playing through Wind Waker, I'm exploring islands, finding huge stashes of rupees and mapping out the world. In fact, on this playthrough alone, I already had 4 charts found and paid for by the time I needed to get the rest of them. I feel like it's the natural progression of this game. If you explore, you will find things that you need to progress. It never really felt like a stopgap to me. Plus, some of these charts are rather unique. Some are simple, that require you just to bomb a ship, or maybe hit some switches with a seagull. But others have a lot of charm. There is a massive tunnel on Outset Island that requires you to fight waves and waves of enemies, eventually concluding with a fight against several Dark Nuts, one of them being of the gold variety. There's also my favorite chart, which is on the Ghost ship. It is a ship that only shows up on certain moons in certain locations, which I will say can be annoying if you don't know exactly where to find them, but in the modern era with the internet, it's very easy to find these locations. All that being said, it's incredibly ominous and atmospheric to be out at sea in the middle of the night and suddenly see a ghastly ship off in the distance. I mean, shoot, even that private oasis I talked about has a secret lever with your grappling hook. It takes you to a secret underground sewer system that eventually houses a Triforce chart. All I'm trying to say is that there's a lot to do before the end of the game. But I like how it adds to the exploring and gives importance to the random locations throughout the world. Once we find all the charts and fish up their respective shards, we return to the Tower of Gods. Here you obtain the Triforce of Courage, and you are officially crowned the Hero of the Wind. It's now time to take up your duty as the hero and defeat Ganondorf. Although, surprise, surprise, Ganondorf is one step ahead of us. He was actually able to find Zelda and capture her. He says he wants to torment you for the rest of time, and sends 2 of his finest soldiers. This is a great start to the finale of the game. You fight 2 intimidating Dark Nuts surrounded by a ring of fire. It's atmospheric and honestly somewhat challenging. If you're not careful, you could definitely lose. After defeating the Dark Nuts, you can go to Ganon's tower and break the Seal of Darkness with our newly found Master Sword powers. The walk up is actually pretty cool. You actually get to explore some of Hyrule. The unfortunate part is it's very brief. In order to get to Ganondorf, you have to ascend his tower. This requires you to choose 4 paths, each of which resemble a previous temple, and requires you to relive a boss fight. I've always thought this part was cool because again, it kind of plays with the Frozen time theme. You fight the boss and it's entirely in black and white, devoid of color. I think this is intentional to show that these aren't necessarily real creatures, but some kind of remnants left behind. Plus, I always think boss fights are just fun in general. Each time you defeat a boss, it reveals a mark on the door, and it eventually opens once you've beaten all 4. Once the door is opened, we take an ominous stairway up to the tower, and it leads to a small lantern puzzle room. However, if we drop below, we are put in a fight with none other than Phantom Ganon. However, this time you slash him once, and he's dead. But this is part of the puzzle. Every time you kill him, you have to follow the hilt of his sword. If you don't, you'll go through a door that will be looping you forever. I think this is a pretty cool puzzle overall. The only real downside is that the only place it tells you how to solve this puzzle is from a little rock slab before you drop. At the end of the puzzle, you are rewarded with the light arrow. This is the most important item for defeating the evil King Ganondorf. It allows us to finally deal with Phantom Ganon once and for all. I like this part a lot because once you defeat him, you actually get to use his sword and break the final door of the area. You're met with another long staircase, fighting Ganon's toughest forces. You'll eventually make it to a door guarded by 2 Dark Nuts. Once you defeat them, it's time for the end. The game's grand finale starts off with you trudging through water, seeing a sleeping Zelda, but Ganondorf is watching over her, waiting for you. He's holding a grudge against you and promises to end this once and for all. He slowly transforms into the puppet Ganon, the first of the end. The main goal of this fight is to use the boomerang to knock down the puppet strings. Once you do, you have to shoot a light arrow at the tail. In order to go to the next phase, you need to hit it 3 times. Once you do this, Puppet Ganon will transform into a spider. The spider is probably my least favorite part because you need to throw a bomb in his mouth in order to hurt him. But for the most part, it's just waiting for him to fall so you can shoot the tail again. It then transitions into the 3rd form, which in my opinion is actually pretty good. It's like a snake where it's moving very quickly, but you have the same goal. Shoot its tail with a light arrow to destroy it. I enjoy how active this fight actually is. Everything comes down to dodging his attacks and using your own attacks, without lock-ons, mind you. Once defeated, Ganondorf calls you the Hero of Time's descendant, and then flies away with Zelda. One of my favorite parts is how once you beat the boss, you actually use Puppet Ganon's string to go up to where Ganondorf was. It again is an example of using the existing world in clever ways. It just makes logical sense that the puppet has to be controlled from somewhere, and sure enough, it's Ganondorf from above. So after climbing to the top, you finally have a conversation with Ganondorf, and he talks about how his world was crushed. This part's kind of nice because you actually see Ganondorf more of a person. He's someone who's steeped in anger and rage and wants revenge. He's convinced that the Triforce was his only way to make his dream a reality. Once he gets all 3 pieces, he can finally make his wish and make the world exactly the way he wants it. He doesn't even want to kill Link. He just wants to use the power of the Triforce so he can make his dream come true. However, just before Ganondorf makes his wish, the King of Hyrule steps in. He instead wishes to flood Hyrule permanently this time. He wishes that the people that are still alive will have hope for the future. Shortly after this, Zelda awakens and the fight begins. This is such an amazing setup for a final boss. Hyrule begins to flood and Ganondorf is going crazy because his plan was literally thwarted at the last second. I mean, listen to his almost hysterical laugh. He literally sounds like he's going insane. This fight has so much going for it. The fate of the world depends on the battle, and even though there's no literal time limit, in the game, canonically, it's a race against time to defeat Ganondorf before Hyrule is permanently flooded. And luckily, the fight lives up to that moment as well. You work together with Zelda to distract Ganondorf so that she can shoot him with a light arrow. Eventually, he gets a little annoyed by being shot by arrows, and decides to knock out Zelda. So it's your job to fight until she can get back up on her feet. Once Zelda returns to the fray, she shoots arrows at you. What? It's kind of funny because Ganondorf is more defensive, so he's dodging your attacks. So what you have to actually do is use your mirror shield to reflect the light arrows. But there are definitely a few times she just directly shot me instead. The mix-up is pretty fun. It adds so much more intensity and it feels like you're in a proper sword fight with Ganondorf. After working with Zelda to hit Ganondorf a few more times, he becomes weak enough where you can hit him with one final counter. And it ends with a completely brutal finish to Ganondorf. You stab him directly in his head and he turns to stone. It's an epic conclusion to an adventurous story. The fight is full of energy and you feel accomplished when you finally win. Shortly after your victory, it leads to a somber moment, where the King of Hyrule apologizes that he had to leave the children and the world in such an ugly state. However, the twist is that shortly after this ending, you're actually inspired with hope, because Link and Tetra return to the surface and have a reunion with all of their friends. Link's sister, the pirates, and even the new sages Makar and Medley make it. The Wind Waker is honestly a great game. It's not without its flaws, and you can tell where time constraints left their mark. But even with its imperfections, it's an incredibly bold and charming experience. For its era, it was shockingly innovative. The open sea may not be vast by today's standards, but it feels massive, because it captures something that so many games, even now, fail to deliver. The true spirit of adventure. The kind that feels whimsical, mysterious, and free. It's a story about courage, about setting sail into the unknown, and about finding joy in the journey, even if it's a little messy. And despite being 2 decades old, it still brings a smile to my face every time I revisit it. In the end, that's what a truly timeless game does. This is The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know your favorite Wind Waker memories in the comments below. If you like this video and want to see more, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. I have a couple videos in the work, and I hope to get them out to you soon. See ya!